This video may contain what could be considered attorney advertising under the rules of your state. This video is for information purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. If you have a legal problem, it's vital for you to seek out and talk to a licensed attorney for advice. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Chris Simmons, attorney at law, and today we're going to continue talking about free speech. Now, as an American, I love free speech. Free speech is the lifeblood of our government, of our way of life, of our society. American free speech is so broad that the government really can't stop us from saying anything. They can't really ban anything, except they can. There are 4 types of unprotected speech, and these are types of speech that the government can just outright ban. And then there are 3 types of lesser protected speech. We'll cover those in the future video. But the government can actually ban some types of speech, and that may sound weird to you if you're an American. But once you understand what these 4 types are and how narrow these classes of speech are, you understand why the government can ban these. Now, without further ado, these are obscenity, incitement, true threat, and fighting words. We're going to go over each of them very, very briefly. Now notice hate speech is not one of those unprotected categories of speech. You could argue that it falls within fighting words, and actually I do a little bit, but there's really no way that anyone can regulate that because it would be viewpoint based discrimination, which would be struck down. But we'll cover hate speech in a future video, because that's a controversial topic and we're going to need to delve deep into it. Now, before we get into the 4 types that we're going to talk about today, we need to understand what speech is. We need that common language. Speech is not just me talking to you. Speech is not you talking to me. Speech can be that, but it's not only that. Speech can be an action or a lack of action. Speech can be silence. It can be art, and it can even be spending money. In our system, yes, speech equals money. The Supreme Court said it. You may not agree with it. Personally, I don't particularly agree with that interpretation, but that's the law we have, and that's the one that we abide. So, that's what speech is. So how can the government limit that? Ban it, even. Well, for obscenity has to fall within 3 categories, 3 elements of obscenity. If any of these fail, it's not obscene by law, and the government can't ban it. Now, first element we have to meet, whether the work appeals to the prurient interest of an average person using contemporary standards. What does that mean? Well, prurient interests it has to appeal to our baser needs. We most often think of this as sexual arousal, like a sexual need. And it has to be contemporary standards. So we can't take the standards of an average person from 1920 and apply it today. We can't take the 1800 standard of obscenity and apply it to today. No, we apply 2018 standards to 2018 cases. Next, the work must depict or describe sex or excretory functions in an unmistakably offensive way. Another way of saying that, a patently offensive way. That means it has to do with sex or using the restroom. Finally, it must lack serious value in art, literature, politics, or science. If it has some type of value in any of those, it's not obscene. The best example I can think of, and probably one of the sadder ones for me, is the example my law professor gave. And he gave the example of crush videos. These are videos you'll see on shock sites sometimes, and it essentially boiled down to women in stilettos crushing small animals under their heel. Now, if you're an animal lover, that sounds horrific, and it is. That actually went to court. And the Supreme Court said that that's not obscenity because there is some value in it, in art. That's how strict our obscenity laws are. So even you'll hear people going, that's obscene. Well, they aren't talking about obscenity. And if they are, well, good luck proving it most of the time. So that's obscenity. There is an exception to obscenity. There is an exception to the strictness. And I wouldn't really call it an exception. It's more the government has met their burden of strict scrutiny to ensure that child pornography is banned. Sorry. And this is because there is a legitimate government interest in protecting children. So, because there's a legitimate government interest in protecting children, we are able to ban child pornography under obscenity laws. So that's the exception to the rule, I guess, that nothing is really obscene. Next, let's go to true threat. This is actually super easy to explain. It's an actual threat, and the person making the threat, well, they have to be able to carry it out. So if I grab, if you'll give me just 1 second, I have a foam cardboard gun that I made for a costume at some point, okay? Now, we can see that this is fake. We can see that there's no way you're getting harmed from this. But if I point it straight at you, pretend you're right in front of me. If I pointed this straight at you and said, I will murder you, was this a true threat? Well, we know it's not. I have no actual ability to carry out the threat because there's nothing that this thing can do. But if this was an actual gun, and I pointed it at your head and said, I will murder you, I will kill you, well, that's a true threat because I'd be able to carry out the threat and I am actually threatening you. Okay? So, next, let's move to incitement. The classic example of incitement that I can think of is yelling fire in a crowded theater. You're causing mass panic. You're inciting mass panic. That's not exactly the definition, but it's a good example of it. Incitement is speech that incites a violation of the law in an imminent and likely way. Now, what does that mean? Well, if I'm up on a soapbox and I go, everyone should rob that bank, and I point to the bank that I want them to rob, and they immediately go do that, well, that's incitement. But the immediate part, the imminent part, that's the linchpin for this a lot of times. Because if it's not imminent, if it's not immediate, well, then it's not incitement. If I say rob a bank and 2 days later you rob that bank, that's not incitement. That could be other things, but that's not incitement. So, next we get to fighting words. This is the last type. This is what I would argue hate speech is under. And here's the thing. Fighting words are words by their very utterance that inflict injury or tend to incite an immediate breach of the peace. But the definition is so narrow that that is literally the only thing that a state can put in. So let's give an example of fighting words. Let's do hate speech first. Hate speech could possibly fall within it. If I go up to a group of black people and call them the N-word to their face, that could be a fighting word. But states can't specifically ban hate speech because banning hate speech would be both content and viewpoint based, and thus it's unconstitutional. But let's give some examples of what fighting words are not. Fuck the draft on a jacket. That's not fighting words. That's a political statement. It's not targeted at one person, even though it could inflict injury or incite, incite is the wrong word, but cause an immediate breach of the peace. Those aren't fighting words. We had a case over it. Flag burning, verbally abusing the flag, not fighting words. You may think it's disrespectful, not fighting words. Political speech. Nazis marching. Swastika is not considered fighting words. That comes from Skokie, Illinois, just north of me. These are ideas of fighting words. And to figure out the difference between incitement and fighting words, I always think of it this way. Incitement is when I'm telling someone to go do something else. Fighting words are when I'm directing my speech at you to get you to attack me. That's how I think of it. It's not exactly the easiest way of explaining, but that's how I think of it. So the government can actually ban all 4 types of this speech. Next, we'll deal with hate speech. After that, we're going to deal with lesser protected speech, profanity, defamation, commercial speech. And then we'll move into some other issues like campaign finance laws. But for now, understand that even American freedom of speech, our First Amendment, is not unlimited. There are actual limits to American free speech. So, in America, not everything goes. And these types, if you can fit them within there, these are the types of speech that don't go. So, we'll deal with hate speech in the next video. I'll see you then.